The air inside the Kowalski home felt strangely heavy the night everything began to shift. It wasn't a storm, nothing dramatic, just a quiet Florida evening, the kind where the hum of the ceiling fan drowned out everything else. But 9-year-old Maya sat curled on the couch, her legs pulled tight to her chest, eyes blinking fast as if she were trying not to cry. Her mother, Beata, noticed the tremor in her daughter's hands before Maya tried to hide them under a pillow. That small tremor would become the first sign of a journey none of them could have imagined, one that would destroy a family, ignite a national debate, break a mother, and leave a teenage girl fighting not just for her health but for her identity, her truth, and her freedom. When Maya whispered, "Mom, it hurts again," Beata didn't hesitate. She swept to her daughter's side, feeling the heat radiating from her skin. Maya's legs were already blotchy, patches of red and purple like bruises that had bloomed without warning. She had been complaining of headaches for weeks, but that night the pain rose like a tide. Her breath stuttered, and her small hands clutched her stomach as if something inside her was twisting apart. Her father, Jack, knelt beside her, pressing the back of his hand to her forehead, whispering to her to breathe, to stay calm, to tell him where it hurt most. Just hours later, they were at the emergency room. Doctors moved around her briskly, ordering tests, monitoring oxygen, administering fluids, but answers never came easily. One doctor brushed off her symptoms as anxiety. Another suggested dehydration. A third said growing pains. Maya cried through it all, tears that came from somewhere deep, something dark and unbearable. Beata stayed glued to her daughter's side, refusing to accept vague explanations, pushing back gently at first, then firmly, then desperately. She knew her child. She knew this was real. The following months became a cycle of symptoms and hospital visits, each one leaving the family with more questions and fewer solutions. The lesions on Maya's arms grew larger, her legs sensitive to even a breath of air. A single touch could send her into a spiral of pain so intense she would gasp, sometimes unable to speak. She stopped playing outside, stopped wearing jeans because fabric hurt too much, stopped sleeping normally. Beata kept a notebook of every symptom, every change, every medication. Jack kept working double shifts to cover bills and still made it home in time to hold Maya's hand through the worst nights. Everything changed the day a neurologist gave the condition a name, complex regional pain syndrome, or CRPS. He explained it as a malfunction of the nervous system, a misfiring pain response so severe it had once been nicknamed the suicide disease. The diagnosis terrified the family but also relieved them. Finally, someone believed Maya. Finally, they had words for what she was feeling. That relief didn't last long. CRPS treatments weren't simple. They required specialists, therapies, and medications that not every hospital approved. The one treatment that consistently helped Maya was ketamine therapy, infusions that temporarily reset pain signals. Under controlled care with proper monitoring, they brought Maya back to herself. The color returned to her face, the tremors decreased, the burning sensations faded. She could walk without wincing, sleep without waking up screaming, smile without forcing it. But the condition flared again in the fall of 2016. This time it was her stomach, pain so sharp she doubled over, unable to stand, sweat pooling at her temples. Jack carried her to the car while Beata grabbed her medical folder, the thick binder containing every diagnosis, every report, every letter from every specialist who had ever seen their daughter. They rushed to Johns Hopkins All-Children's Hospital, certain they were doing the right thing, certain this hospital, one of the best in the region, would help. Instead, they stepped into a nightmare. From the beginning, the hospital staff seemed skeptical. A nurse raised an eyebrow when Beata explained Maya's need for ketamine. A resident asked probing questions about Maya's home life, her mother's parenting, her father's schedule. A social worker visited within hours, asking odd questions that didn't feel medical at all. When Beata explained CRPS in her familiar, confident tone, she had memorized so much about the disease by then, the staff's expressions tightened. Then came the accusation. Quietly at first, then written into charts, then spoken aloud with a seriousness that made the air feel colder. Munchausen syndrome by proxy, a psychological disorder in which a caregiver fabricates or induces illness in a child. They believed Beata wasn't advocating for her daughter. They believed she was harming her. It didn't matter that Maya cried from real pain, that her limbs shook uncontrollably, that she begged for the treatment that had helped her before. It didn't matter that specialists outside the hospital had confirmed her diagnosis. A single accusation overshadowed every fact, every medical note, every plea. Within days, the state intervened. Maya was placed in medical custody, forbidden to see her parents except under supervision. Beata was treated not as a mother but as a suspect. Jack was warned not to interfere. The family that had walked into the hospital seeking help was suddenly fractured by the very institution meant to protect them. For Maya, the separation was agony. She lay in her hospital bed, lights dimmed, machines humming, waiting for the sound of her mother's voice. But the visits were short, scheduled, watched closely by social workers who wrote notes every time Beata touched her daughter's hair or whispered something comforting. When Beata cried, they wrote that too. The hospital limited physical contact, restricted conversation topics, and monitored every interaction. Nurses changed treatment plans without explanation. Some brushed off Maya's pain as dramatics. Others told her she would improve once her mother wasn't influencing her. For a child already experiencing trauma, the emotional toll was as crushing as the physical pain. Beata tried everything: letters to administrators, calls to lawyers, affidavits from doctors who had previously treated Maya. But every attempt seemed to strengthen the hospital's stance. The more she fought, the more they painted her as unstable. Jack's heartbreak took a quieter form. He held their son Kyle closer, tried to maintain normalcy, tried not to fall apart each time he left the hospital without his daughter. He believed Beata. He believed Maya. But he also saw how the system was closing around them, tightening like a fist. During one visit, Beata reached for Maya's hand. A social worker stepped between them. Maya cried, begging for just a few more minutes. The worker wrote in her file that the child was overly attached. That night, after another denied request for increased visitation, something inside Beata unraveled. She had been accused of the one thing she had dedicated her life to fighting against: her daughter's suffering. She was barred from comforting her child, barred from protecting her, barred from being her mother. Her world, built around caring for Maya, suddenly had no shape, no direction, no meaning. On January 7, 2017, overwhelmed, unheard, and believing she had failed the daughter she loved more than anything, Beata died by suicide. Her final note made one thing devastatingly clear: she could not survive being separated from Maya, and she believed the only way to expose the truth was through her death. When hospital staff informed Maya, she screamed. The sound carried down the hallway, past the nurse's station, past the closed doors of other patients. She tore at her hospital gown, sobbing so hard she couldn't breathe, repeating the same words again and again. "I need my mom. I need her back. I need her." Her pain was documented as an emotional response. Another note was added to the chart. Beata's death forced the state to release Maya into Jack's custody. After 3 months confined to a hospital room, she was suddenly free, but nothing about her felt whole. She limped out of the building, thinner than she'd ever been, her spirit bruised and her childhood fractured in a way that could never be undone. The Kowalski home felt different without Beata. Her voice no longer echoed down the hallway. Her meticulous medical notes sat untouched on the kitchen counter. Maya slept with one of her mother's scarves because it still smelled like her. Jack walked the house at night, unable to rest, haunted by what had happened, terrified of what the future would bring. In the months that followed, Maya struggled to rebuild her life. She resumed ketamine therapy under supervised care, slowly regaining mobility. She returned to school but avoided questions. She tried to smile for her father and brother, but grief clung to her like a shadow. It wasn't until Jack filed a lawsuit against Johns Hopkins All Children's Hospital that the family felt the first flicker of hope. They weren't just fighting for compensation. They were fighting to clear Beata's name, to prove she wasn't the monster the hospital had painted her to be. They wanted the world to know the truth. They wanted accountability. Years later, in 2023, the documentary Take Care of Maya was released. It showed raw footage, interviews, and courtroom testimony that revealed the depth of the tragedy. The world finally saw what the Kowalskis had endured. They saw a mother's anguish, a child's suffering, and a system's catastrophic failure. Public support surged. People across the country reached out, some sharing similar stories of false accusations, medical misunderstandings, or institutional overreach. Maya's story became a symbol of flawed systems, of parental rights, of children caught in the crossfire of medical controversy. Then, in November 2023, a jury awarded the family more than $210 million in damages. In the courtroom, Maya cried as the verdict was read, a mix of relief and grief washing over her. Jack hugged her tightly, and for a moment it felt like justice, fragile but real. But justice is rarely simple. 2 years later, in October 2025, an appeals court reversed the verdict. The ruling sent shockwaves through the family and their supporters. The sense of victory faded into another cycle of legal battles, uncertainty, and emotional exhaustion. It felt like the system had taken from them again, reopening old wounds that had barely begun to heal. Yet through it all, Maya, now older, stronger, and determined, refused to disappear. She had survived medical trauma, institutional separation, national scrutiny, and the unbearable loss of her mother. She had become an advocate without choosing to be one. She had become a symbol, a survivor, and the keeper of a story that still wasn't finished. And even now, a decade after the first symptoms, she continued to fight, not just for her own healing but for the truth that had cost her everything. The months after Beata's death moved in slow, uneven circles for Maya, as if time itself had lost its rhythm. She would wake up some mornings feeling like she was drifting through someone else's life, as if her memories were pieces of a puzzle that she could no longer arrange in the right order. The pain from her CRPS still came in waves, punishing and unpredictable, but the emotional weight pressed even heavier on her chest. Nights were the hardest. She would hear sounds, her mother's footsteps, the clatter of her bracelets, the soft humming she always did while tidying the kitchen. But each time Maya turned toward the doorway, expecting to see her mother standing there with a gentle smile, she found only shadows. Jack tried to be strong, but grief wrapped around him too. He often sat at the dining table long after everyone had gone to bed, staring at Beata's empty chair. He would run his hand along the edge of the table, remembering how she used to tap her nails while thinking, how she would scold Maya gently for skipping vegetables, how she kept the family stitched together with routines and warmth. Now the house felt unbalanced, as if one of its supporting beams had been ripped away. Despite his sorrow, Jack focused relentlessly on helping Maya recover physically. He kept track of medications, adjusted her routine to make her comfortable, and accompanied her to appointments. The CRPS flare-up still stole her breath, but with ketamine therapy reinstated under new medical supervision, Maya began to reclaim small parts of her life. She learned to walk short distances again. She managed to shower without crying. She could hold a cup without trembling. These victories seemed insignificant to anyone else, but for her family, they were signs that she might someday step out of the dark tunnel she had been forced into. Still, the psychological damage from the months of forced separation, what doctors later referred to as institutional trauma, had carved deep marks. Maya flinched at the sound of hospital machines. She froze when nurses touched her arm. She panicked if a doctor asked too many questions in the wrong tone. Every clipboard, every medical badge, every sterile white hallway reminded her of the place where she had been isolated, doubted, labeled, and stripped of her mother's touch. Her nightmares replayed scenes she had tried to suppress. The door closing behind Beata during supervised visits, the accusations whispered by staff, the night she had been told that her mother would never come back. Therapists told Jack that healing would take time, patience, and gentleness. But they also warned him that trauma like Maya's did not disappear. It merely learned to live alongside the person carrying it. School became another complicated chapter. When she returned, teachers welcomed her gently, but classmates were curious in ways that made her uncomfortable. Some whispered that she had been the girl from Netflix, because even before the documentary released, local media had mentioned the hospital case. Others asked why she had been gone, why she walked with a limp, why she flinched when someone bumped into her. She kept her answers short and quiet. But there were also kind faces, friends who walked slower so she could keep up, teachers who let her sit near the door in case she needed a break, a counselor who let her talk only when she felt ready. These small mercies kept Maya tethered to the world outside the courtroom drama that was beginning to intensify. Jack's lawsuit against Johns Hopkins All Children's Hospital slowly gained momentum. Lawyers examined thousands of pages of medical records, deposition transcripts, and internal hospital documents. They spoke with former staff members, CRPS specialists, and child welfare advocates. Their goal was not just compensation, it was truth. They wanted to prove that Beata had not harmed her daughter, that Maya's condition was real, and that the hospital's actions had destroyed a family. For Maya, the legal process was another burden. She didn't want to relive the memories, didn't want to sit across from lawyers who asked her to recount moments that already felt like open wounds. But she understood why it mattered. She knew her mother's name was on trial just as much as the hospital. Each deposition felt like peeling away a scab, exposing the rawness beneath. But she did it. She answered questions. She told the truth. And each time she did, she felt closer to reclaiming the narrative that had been taken from her. When the documentary Take Care of Maya began filming, Maya hesitated. She didn't want cameras capturing her pain, didn't want the world dissecting her story. But she also realized that silence had cost her family everything. If people didn't understand what had happened, nothing would change. So she allowed the filmmakers into her life, with limits. They spoke with her gently, respectfully, never pushing beyond what she could handle. The crew documented the family history, interviewed Jack and Maya separately, reviewed court footage, and pieced together the events that had led to Beata's death. When filming wrapped, Maya felt both lighter and heavier. Telling the story had drained her, but it had also given her back some control. She no longer had to hide what she'd endured. She had spoken her truth publicly. The world could judge, but she had finally said everything that had been locked inside her. The documentary premiered in summer 2023 and became an immediate conversation starter. Millions streamed it within days. Social media exploded with outrage, sympathy, shock, and anger. Some viewers sent heartfelt messages to Maya, telling her she was brave. Others shared stories of their own battles with medical systems or child protective services. Advocates demanded reform. Parents cried openly while watching Beata's footage, understanding the suffocating fear of losing a child. News networks debated the case, and CRPS support groups cited the documentary as a turning point for awareness. For Maya, watching her mother on screen again was excruciating. The recordings of Beata smiling, talking, pleading, defending felt like a lifeline thrown back through time. In the scene where Beata spoke warmly into the camera about fighting for Maya, Maya broke down. It felt as if her mother had returned for a brief moment, her voice threaded through the static, reaching across years to hold her again. She replayed that clip over and over, each time whispering, "I'm still fighting, Mom. I'm still here." The release also meant increased public attention. People recognized Maya in grocery stores, at cafes, outside school events. Some approached gently, offering hugs or prayers. Others kept their distance but left notes on her car thanking her for sharing her story. There were a few who muttered skepticism, but they were rare. For the most part, people understood the gravity of the injustice, and they treated her with compassion. The support strengthened Maya emotionally, but it also brought new pressure. She felt she needed to be strong for everyone watching, to live up to the idea of being a survivor, an advocate. Some nights she lay awake wondering what her life might have been like if none of this had happened, if she had simply grown up quietly, without medical crises, without hospital walls, without legal battles, without trauma branding itself into her childhood. But that alternate version of her life didn't exist. She had to build her future from the pieces she had. As the trial date approached, anxiety settled over the Kowalski household once again. Lawyers prepared Maya for the questions she could face, the accusations, the scrutiny. They warned her that the hospital would try to discredit her mother. They explained that defending themselves meant attacking the family's narrative. Maya listened carefully, her posture stiff, her voice steady. She wasn't the frightened 9-year-old child anymore. She was older now, clearer in her convictions, and she refused to let anyone twist her story again. The courtroom was larger and colder than she expected. The white walls seemed designed to strip emotion, to turn suffering into legal procedure. Jack sat beside her, squeezing her hand when her breathing quickened. Across the aisle sat hospital representatives, attorneys in crisp suits flipping through files. Their faces were unreadable. Maya glanced at them only once. The weight of their gaze felt like stepping back into 2016. When she took the stand, the room fell silent. Cameras were not allowed in the courtroom, but journalists filled the benches, ready to report every detail. Maya inhaled deeply, steadying the tremor in her chest. Her voice shook on the first question, but she found her rhythm as she continued. She spoke about her pain, about her diagnosis, about the ketamine treatments that had helped her. She described the hospital's skepticism, the separation, the feeling of being trapped. She talked about the night she learned her mother was gone, how the world split open inside her. The jury watched her carefully, some with tears in their eyes. When cross-examination began, Maya braced herself. The hospital's attorney probed her memories, questioned her mother's behavior, hinted gently at psychological influence. Maya answered steadily. She didn't go silent. She didn't break. She looked the attorney directly in the eyes and said, "My mother never hurt me. She was the only one who understood my pain, the only one who believed me." That statement lingered in the courtroom like a stone, dropped into deep water. Throughout the trial, Maya observed how her father held himself together. Jack testified calmly, even when recounting the most painful moments. He spoke about Beata's devotion, her meticulous care, her desperation when the hospital took Maya away. The lawyers showed videos, photos, charts, home recordings, all of it painting a picture of a mother who loved fiercely, who fought relentlessly, and who was unjustly accused. When the jury deliberated, the waiting felt endless. Maya sat outside the courthouse, her knee bouncing uncontrollably. She watched the wind press leaves against the sidewalk and prayed that, for once, the system that had taken so much would return something meaningful. The verdict arrived in November 2023. The jurors filed in silently, each face unreadable. When the judge read the decision, over $210 million in damages, Maya's breath caught. Jack wrapped his arms around her and she collapsed into his chest, sobbing. It wasn't the money that made her cry. It was the validation. The world had finally acknowledged that what happened was wrong. Her mother had been right. Her mother had been good. Her mother had been innocent. The courtroom erupted with emotion. Attorneys shook hands, journalists sprinted for the doors, spectators wiped tears. Maya felt a crack in the grief soften for the first time since she had lost Beata. This verdict felt like a small piece of her mother being restored to her. But the relief didn't last forever. Lawsuits rarely end with the first verdict, and the hospital appealed the ruling almost immediately. Over the next 2 years, lawyers went back and forth, arguing technicalities, evidence procedures, jurisdictional issues, and interpretations of child welfare law. For Maya, it felt like being dragged once again into a place she desperately wanted to leave behind. Then, in October 2025, the appeals court issued its decision. The original judgment was reversed. The news crashed into Maya like a physical blow. She was older by then, but the pain felt familiar, sharp, unjust, hollowing. It wasn't just about money. It was about acknowledgement. The reversal felt as though the truth had been smudged again, blurred by legal complexities and institutional power. She sat on her bed the night she heard the news, staring at the ceiling, tears sliding silently down her temples. She clutched her mother's scarf, the same one she had kept since 2017. The fabric was worn, the scent faded, but holding it still made her feel anchored. She whispered into the darkness, "I know what happened. I know what you did for me. Nothing can erase that." Jack entered her room then and sat beside her. He didn't speak at first, he simply held her. After a long silence, he said, "No ruling changes the truth. You survived. Your mother loved you, and we keep fighting, not for a verdict, but for what's right." Those words helped, even if they didn't erase the disappointment. Yet in the days that followed, Maya realized something quietly powerful. The documentary had already changed public understanding. People across the world believed her story. Support for the family did not diminish after the reversal. If anything, the outrage grew stronger. Advocates argued for reforms in child welfare investigations. CRPS awareness increased dramatically. Conversations about medical overreach gained new urgency. Maya's experience was no longer just her own. It had become part of a larger push for justice everywhere. With that realization, Maya found her footing again. She wasn't done. She wasn't finished healing. And she wasn't finished fighting, not for a verdict, but for her mother's memory, her own well-being, and the countless families caught in similar battles. The world around Maya continued to move forward, even on the days when she felt stuck in place, caught between past trauma and an uncertain future. After the appeals court reversal, she felt the familiar weight of disappointment settle over her again. But she was older now, stronger in quiet ways she didn't always recognize. She no longer felt like the frightened child left alone in a hospital bed. She had grown into someone who understood the fragility of trust, the cost of truth, and the resilience required to face a world that wasn't always fair. Her days became a mix of rebuilding routines and shaping new ones. She attended college classes online at first, wary of environments she couldn't control, but eventually she pushed herself to attend in person. The campus felt enormous, buzzing with strangers who had no idea who she was or what she had endured. The anonymity felt refreshing and terrifying at the same time. Sometimes she overheard students discussing the documentary, completely unaware that she was within earshot. She listened quietly, never correcting them, never introducing herself, just observing how her story lived in the world without her having to explain it anymore. Maya studied psychology because she wanted to understand trauma from inside out, wanted to give language to the chaos that had once swallowed her whole. Her professors admired her dedication, her willingness to engage deeply with difficult topics. She wrote essays about institutional power, systemic failings, the emotional scars of separation, all without mentioning her own experiences directly. But the depth of her insight revealed itself between the lines. Jack watched her transformation with both pride and caution. He knew how hard she worked to appear stable, how much energy it took to manage CRPS flare-ups while juggling school and advocacy. He encouraged her to rest, to breathe, to remember she didn't owe the world constant strength. But Maya felt a responsibility that she couldn't easily set aside. She had lived through a tragedy that had reshaped her, and the more she healed, the more she understood that she could use her voice to prevent others from enduring the same. Speaking engagements began slowly. A CRPS support group invited her first, asking if she would share her journey with newly diagnosed teens. She hesitated but agreed. Standing in front of a small circle of chairs, she spoke softly at first, describing her early symptoms, her pain, the confusion. Then she told them about the hospital, the accusations, the months of forced separation, and the loss of her mother. The room went silent as she spoke, not out of shock, but in recognition. The participants understood what it meant to be doubted, to be dismissed, to be seen as exaggerating. When she finished, a young girl with bandaged legs approached her and said, "You made me feel less alone." Those words stayed with Maya for weeks. From there, invitations multiplied. medical panels, advocacy forums, virtual conferences. Each time she spoke, she tried to balance honesty with composure. She didn't want to be defined only by tragedy, but she also refused to minimize what had happened. Her voice grew steadier, more assured. She wasn't just telling her story. She was explaining the failure of a system that had misinterpreted a mother's desperation as a threat. But even as she stepped into the role of advocate, she continued to battle her own private struggles. Some mornings she woke with her muscles locked in pain so severe she could barely sit up. Other days she found herself overwhelmed by sudden memories, the sterile smell of hospital disinfectant, the sound of a social worker's footsteps, the feeling of being watched. She still carried her mother's scarf in her backpack, a talisman she touched whenever anxiety rose like a wave. Therapy helped, though it took years for her to trust the process, years to speak openly about the guilt she carried for surviving when her mother had not. Jack spent much of his time managing legal updates. Even after the reversal, the lawsuit wasn't entirely over. There were discussions about further appeals, alternative legal routes, public petitions. Though the outcome was uncertain, the family had something they never had before the documentary: national support. People wrote letters demanding reform, urging lawmakers to examine child welfare procedures that allowed children to be removed based on flimsy or misunderstood medical opinions. Maya read some of those letters and felt hope blooming quietly inside her. Her mother's pain hadn't been in vain. It was becoming a catalyst for change. Kyle, now older as well, found his own way through the aftermath. He kept most of his emotions tucked beneath a calm exterior, but he stood by Maya fiercely. He accompanied her to events when she felt nervous, sat beside her during interviews, picked her up from class when her pain spiked. They spoke often about their mother, piecing together memories like tiny fragments of stained glass, each one sharp, beautiful, and irreplaceable. In some ways, losing Beata had welded the siblings together more tightly than anything else could have. As the 10th anniversary of Maya's 2015 hospitalization approached, she found herself reflecting on everything that had unfolded in those 10 long years. The confusion, the diagnoses, the separation, the legal battles, the documentary, the verdict and its reversal.